Welcome back to Mystara, everybody. Today we're covering another free book, The Savage Coast Monstrous Compendium. That will be included in a link in the text below. That's right, this book is free to download online, thanks to TSR posting up canceled books in their dying days online. It's also one of the weirdest monster manuals ever written, right up there with Planescape in terms of originality and Dark Sun in terms of lethality. So enough hype, let's talk monsters. I'm Mr. Welch, and this is the Savage Coast Monstrous Compendium. The book was written in 1996, which is the year after Mystara saw its last print run. This would have been a sequel to the poor-selling Mystara Monstrous Compendium, but in 96, TSR was well in its death spiral, and it was floundering due to having way too many settings in print and churning out what was considered just garbage for what was a lot of the releases that did see print. Loren Coleman, Ted James, and Tom Zuvich were given credit for designing the book, with Larry Elmore doing the cover. Larry Elmore's cover seemed to be inspired by an abridged description of what the Savage Coast was about, because the bird creature and the cat creature don't resemble anything at all what was inside the book. Either that or TSR just had an unused Elmore painting lie around and just stuck with it on the cover. Pretty sure they weren't in the caring about quality mood with this being canceled. Interior art is credited to Earl Geyer, John Snyder, and Christina Wald. They created the art with a rather unusual red scale artwork. Instead of going black and white to save on money on a book that's not going to see print, instead they went with red ink because of red steel, I guess. It's a bit jarring, but it's free, so I can forgive that. The one common feature almost all the monsters have that sets them apart from every other setting is the fact that most of them are affected by the red curse. Some of the monsters have been warped into new creatures or seemingly merged between two different creatures, like a dog horse, a bulldog frog, a tapir fern, or a cat horse. There's a few monsters making reappearances from older books, like the Nosferatu, the Tortle, the Rakasta, and the Lupin. There's a few Savage Coast variants, like their version of the Phantom, for example. Most of the creatures can't exist outside the Savage Coast because their existence is due to the Red Curse. More than a few have to hunt or eat Cinnabril, which keeps them from appearing outside their natural biome. There's 76 entries for creatures, but that's misleading because several creatures have multiple types. There's about 100 monsters all told in this book. Taking out the duplicates, which include the Malfera and the multiple types of lizardmen, you're still looking at a massive amount of creatures. The one thing I think the book missed on was adding Australian creatures, because it does give some magical versions of those, but it doesn't give you the normal variants. Considering the Wallara region is Fantasy Australia, that would have been a nice touch, because they give you the spirit animal for the koala or the kangaroo, but they don't give you either of those as just regular animals. Plus, throwing drop bears every few minutes at players that won't cover up their heads in a forest is just too much of a temptation. I can't possibly cover 100 monsters in a single video, and I'm not going to, but I can break it down into the different creature types that fill the book, because most of them fall into one category or another. There's normal creatures in the book, but they're boring. It's the ones shaped by the Red Curse or that define the Savage Coast that get talked about. Every monster in this book has a section on whether or not it's affected by the Red Curse or not. The undead, the constructs, and the extra-dimensional creatures are all immune, and a few normal creatures can avoid it as well. There's numerous monsters that do have legacies that don't require Cinnabril, but most of the intelligent creatures, like the sentient manatees, however, do suffer the curse and require Cinnabril to avoid mutating, but since they have no means to refine or mine the power, they just have to suffer from the afflictions. One thing you'll notice is the Mystaran love of just slapping wings on everything is present. Not just including the winged races like the winged minotaurs and the winged elves that were covered in the last book, but you're going to find wings on wolverines, winged wolves, winged cows, and winged lizardmen, and then reverse it by giving a vulture a dog's body. The Mystaran love of anthro creatures gets applied to goats, orangutans, and it's got some interesting twist with the grudgelings, which is a cat with a human face. There is one creature that gets a special mention because they made 18 variants of it. The Heraldic Servant is a reward from the Immortals for a family that proves itself extremely faithful and religious. So the noble family that gets it gets a very special banner that can be used to summon a rather nasty monster to defend their family. You wave the flag at somebody and the Bear Man or the Dragon Man or the Chicken Man jumps out to defend you. Somebody got the short end of their family banner on that chicken guy. Now, if you take the banner into battle, you get an XP bonus for showing it off, but if the heraldic creature gets killed off, it stays dead until your kids inherit your title. So you got a magic flag that summons up a magical animal creature to help you fight. That really sounds like somebody liked the Visionaries toys growing up. In terms of lethality, there's a whole bunch of stuff that will mess up your players. The Amish Room is a mimic-like creature that appears as a vein of precious metals. If it successfully grapples, it automatically kills in a few rounds unless you kill it first. And it's got a lot of hit points because it is metal. The Freelon are a barely sentient dragon-wasp hybrid created when dragons were trying to purge the Aranea. The spider folk learned to hide their appearance to the Freelon, so the Freelon just started attacking humanoids, instead making them annoying and deadly. The fact that they combine the most horrific parts of Dragon Slayer and Alien makes for one really messed up monster. Apparently there's no male Freelon, because any Freelon sting puts Freelon eggs into you and they just start popping out of your body in a matter of days, unless you got a cleric that can kill them. These things are serious TPK candidates. Shimmerfish are man-eating dolphins. They look like regular dolphins and they play like regular dolphins. Then they go into a feeding frenzy like normal piranha. That's just evil. One of the worst is the Inheritor Lich, which can actually force people with legacies to mutate whether they have Cinebril or not. Killing the thing is even harder because it makes its phylactery a red steel item and you have to track that down, and you can only destroy it with an disintegrate spell. For purely background monsters, you get some really interesting ones. Marine cats are normal-sized house cats that provide benefits to a ship's crew by waking up sleepy lookouts, tripping trespassers, or getting their tail stepped on by would-be mutineers. They are on almost every ship and give the story some flavors. Deathmare are undead evil horses that trick people into riding them and then doing their best to get their now trapped raiders killed off. Then you come to the Wormlings, which are very much ripped-off versions of Hutts from Star Wars. They are large, slug-like creatures that run criminal organizations, and the designers weren't even subtle in designing these things. I could go on for hours talking about all these monsters. The book leaves you spoilt for choice with the sheer volume of creatures you can throw at them. The book's biggest issue is that these creatures are largely setting-specific. The Succulus is a large boar that acts like a rust monster to red steel and Cinebril, which for someone in the Savage Coast is quite terrifying. But outside the Savage Coast it can't function. So while it's a great book, it's a little too specialized for a lot of games. Now there's multiple creatures that work just fine outside of it, and if you're running a second edition campaign, there's no reason to grab this considering the price is perfect. So that finishes off the red steel bits of Mystara. They could have gone and done so much more with the setting. There were still large swaths of the area that wasn't covered. There wasn't any modules outside of the one in the Savage Baronies that had an adventure in it. It didn't help that the Savage Coast was 2nd edition compared to Beckme for the rest of Mystara, though. Even if you don't intend to use this book, pick it up anyways and read it for the monster design, because some of these things are just fantastic, though. I'm going to take a break from covering reviews because I want to talk about something that's bugged me for decades now. That's how to fix Wrath of the Immortals, considered the base breaker for Mystara. You get all the Gazetteers finished, finish crafting the game world, and then you nuke nearly half of the map from orbit and destroy a huge chunk of what made the game interesting. So let's change it back and see what we can do to change the setting, but without killing the Cold War feel that made Mystara unique. So remember, until next time, the secret to petting zoos is herbivores.